I would like to take this opportunity to let you know how cool I am. I am a real cool pastor. I know when I do stuff, some of you don't like this and some of you don't like that, but in the larger scheme of things, I am a cool guy and I do cool stuff. Some time ago, I even got an email and it said my friend was at a funeral that you conducted and she thought you were really cool. There you have it in black and white. The mail said what you did and what you said and how you did it and how you said it was real cool. And the friend wanted more of this cool. So the friend is actually seriously considering to maybe one fine day when nothing else is up to actually come to church and to watch a cool pastor doing cool pastor stuff. Aren't you a lucky congregation to have such a cool pastor? Exactly, I expect head nodding here in the sense, yes, you're cool, and yes, we're lucky. But when I look around, I see some skeptical looks from you. That's not cool. If you read our text today, some of the disciples want the honor to sit on Christ's right and left side. That's a biblical way to say, hey, Jesus, don't you think we're really cool? People will get a kick out of us sitting next to you. And Jesus said, and I paraphrase here, guys who are really, really cool have to be really, really uncool. Whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. And this is really uncool. Who wants to be a servant? Where the disciples talk about glory, Christ talks about the cross. The word servant has a bad connotation in the cultural background of Europe and North America. It usually means a lackey. And this word acquired its bad connotation in the feudal history of our culture. Nobles who considered themselves to be something better looked down on the lackeys who had to lick their boots whenever they snapped their fingers. And then came the revolutions in the wake of the Enlightenment, which promised that no one was to be a servant anymore, but that all people were created equal. But the inherent inequality of the human race is not a new thought. It is fundamentally biblical. If Jesus talks about a servant, he doesn't talk about a lackey. He doesn't talk about giving up one's self-respect and letting everybody treat you like a piece of dirt. He talks about serving a higher purpose. And serving a higher purpose with us starts with asking the right questions and making the right wishes. All the Gospels portray the 12 apostles as a bunch of dedicated guys who, yes, they love Jesus, but they are relatively slow in the uptake. They have their heads firmly in the presence, in the here and in the now, and they stand with both feet on the ground. And for the context of the time, they even ask reasonable questions. Christ is the king. Jesus is God's son, and so there is some divine power behind Jesus' claim to kingship. And so they assume, which is absolutely reasonable, that Jesus talks about a real down-to-earth kingdom, one with a real throne to sit upon in Jerusalem, like David's kingdom. And Jesus is a king, and a king, like everybody knows, needs retainers. And why shouldn't those retainers be James and John. Jesus is boss, and they run things like foreign affairs and taxes, temple stuff, and things like that. In a real kingdom, Jesus can't do everything himself, and so why not call dibs on the plum jobs before the others do? Jesus asked them if they can do what he does, and they say yes. And okay, that's in the end exactly what they're getting. Jesus dies, and so does James. He dies by the sword. He's the only apostle whose martyrdom is described in the Bible. John's fate is not clear, and tradition has it that he lived a long life and died of old age, but only after his enemies in Ephesus throw him into a big pot with boiling oil. And then he was miraculously rescued, and he lived the long life only after that experience. And other sources say that he was martyred in Jerusalem. In the Roman Empire, avoiding martyrdom was not just possible, but it was usually very straightforward. You just recanted and said, oh, you made a big mistake following this Christ guy. And from now on, you would be a productive and good member of Roman society and behave as the people around you expected you to behave. And then you sacrificed some incense, and then you were good. As an act, it's easy. The Romans do not care what you believe in your hearts of hearts. What they care about is that you are participating in the state cult. And many Christians did exactly that. When they were confronted with the harsh reality of martyrdom, they recanted and they sacrificed. And there are big discussions in the early church what to do with those who, in the face of persecution, reject Christ and then come back to church as soon as persecution is over. But many do not recant and embrace martyrdom. That so many early Christians and all of the apostles rather die than recant indicates that they think they have something to gain that is more valuable than staying alive. And to be absolutely clear, I am not promoting martyrdom. If you ask me, just among us, when Roman officials ever confront you and ask you to sacrifice to the emperor or else you will be lunch for lions, sacrifice to the emperor. And when they let you off the hook, then come back to church. I prefer sinners that are alive to saints that are dead. But that is, of course, a very personal preference that does not add many heroes to the story of the Christian faith. But looking at the stories of the apostles who all died as martyrs, with the only possible exception being John, it seems that at some point they were not that dim-witted bunch anymore that the Gospels portray. Pentecost happened. And it seems that their perspective had changed after that, in the wake of the Spirit entering their hearts. A bunch of guys who had their heads in the clouds of human ambition and desire, and who followed the poor itinerant preacher around, and who harbored dreams of power and wealth, had transformed into disciples of Christ. And that changed the meaning of sitting at Jesus' side, because now they were carrying the church on their shoulders as Jesus had carried the world. They recognized that salvation is not to be found in what the world considers to be of value, like wealth and power and prestige, like being in second in command to a divine king who wields all the power that the human mind can dream up. But salvation is to be found in following Christ. Even following Christ into death, in the sure hope that a journey does not end there, but that as we follow Christ into death, we also follow him out of the grave into resurrection and new life. Discipleship and trusting God shifts one's perspective. A servant of God is not a lackey who is forced to prostrate himself before other humans. Servants of God do God's work with their hands. They participate in God loving the world. And that, in the end, is liberation from conforming to what culture sees as a purpose of life. And depending on the time, that can be very different things. It may be wealth in a capitalist culture or honor in the ancient Roman culture. Both are fundamentally different values, but both have in common that they are extremely difficult to achieve. And the way to the top is therefore littered with the casualties of ambition and desire. Blinded by the desire to succeed, many people sacrifice their humanity, and then they call the absence of compassion and love the real world, where the winner takes all and the losers get trampled into the dust. God's kingdom knows no losers. It is difficult to see beyond the perspective of culture, but the attempt to do that is very much worth it. It is so valuable that some of us even think it is worth more than life. Putting our lives on the line is a challenge we hopefully never face. But being profoundly countercultural in our hyper-individualism-driven society of putting God's justice before individual desire and ambition, that is challenge enough for a lifetime. It means putting God's kingdom before what we usually think is success in the real world. It means recognizing the love and grace of God as a true purpose of the human existence. Amen.